speaker this morning, David M. So, David.
Thank you. My name is David. I am a sexaholic.
Hi, David.
And my sobriety date, by the grace of my higher power, is August 2nd, 1988, for which I can never be sufficiently grateful. And my disease took the form of compulsive fantasizing, beginning at earlier than age 4, taking my clothes off in public, voyeurism, and sex with other boys, and all of that was before age 7. Then trying to get girls to undress for me, discovered masturbation at age 10, and from that time on didn't stop masturbating regularly and usually frequently. In fact, it always puzzled me that I always knew exactly how recently I had masturbated and when I was going to do it again. And cross-dressing, sex with animals, use of pornography in all its forms, and multiple adulterous affairs. And my sobriety date, as I said, is August 2nd. On August 1st, around midnight, or late at night, 11 o'clock, my wife confronted me with having gone out to lunch with a woman, and it was not someone with whom I was having an affair. It was certainly a lust relationship. And she ordered me out of the house, and we went in the afternoon to see a therapist we had started with, and that woman listened to my description of how I just had to be involved with more than one woman at a time, and said, well, you're just a sex addict. And I've never forgotten the goosebumps from that moment. At least I hope I haven't. I hope I never do. And went to my first SA meeting. I've written a memory of our founder, Roy Kay, that'll be in the next essay, and the woman who's the editor of the essay wrote me and said, could we get any more details on when you came into SA? And I said, well, yeah, it was 8 o'clock on Tuesday night, August 2nd, 1988, in room 374 of the West End United Methodist Church. And there were 7 guys there in addition to me. And one of the guys there knew me, which I was not happy about that night, but I was very grateful later on because it got it over with right away. And I was just laughing. I said, is that enough detail for you? But I remember one of my favorite AA tapes, the speaker says, as long as we remember that moment at which we knew the jig was up, we never need to go back to it again. And if we ever forget that moment, we're doomed to repeat it. And that's been very accurate for my life as far as I can tell. When we were reading What is a Sexaholic, I was drawn to that line that lust is the driving force behind our sexual acting out, and true sobriety includes progressive victory over lust. I've had, I guess 6 or 7 sponsors in the time I've been in SA. My first sponsor was the person who returned the call on August 2nd. I didn't understand at the time that somebody actually answering the phone call on the same day, much less the same week or month that you make it, is truly remarkable. And Steve met me at the meeting and was my sponsor for the first 8 or 9 months. He saw me through, or he listened to my 5th step, and then he left the program. He was on his way out anyway. He had become less and less involved. And then after he departed, and I had just a short period without a sponsor, probably a month, I got another sponsor, and I called Harvey every morning at 7:30 for a little over 7 years, no matter where I was in the world, and was pretty literal about that. And Harvey became preoccupied with something else, and I was having cancer at the time and cancer treatment and all that stuff, and he wasn't really available. So I said, what do? I need a sponsor I can reach. And he said, well, why don't you call my sponsor? And his sponsor was Jess, so I started doing that. And Jess was sober on alcohol quite a few years, 20 years or something, had founded another 12-step program, Emotions Anonymous, and was still watching his marriage fall apart and get worse and worse. And finally his wife confronted him and said, either you do something about your sexual behavior or I'm gone. And he was really petrified. And he was in Phoenix, Arizona, and other than Simi Valley, where our founder Roy lived, the only other meeting was in Phoenix, Arizona. And he got in touch with someone, and the guy said, well, Jess, it's what's in your head that's killing you. It's the lust that's killing you. And Jess had never heard that before. He thought it had something to do with sex. And it didn't have anything to do with sex. And that's as soon as he heard that and got a chance to let it sink in, he became very active in SA and really founded meetings literally all over the United States and Canada. So whenever I hear that line, it's what's in our head that's killing us. It's the lust that's killing us. I just hear Jess's voice in the background. Jess was a great sponsor. Just did a lot of wonderful things in terms of just being available. He was very available. And until he one day had just talked to someone in England and hung up the phone and keeled over and died. And he had 3 or 4 heart attacks and multiple surgeries. And so his death in and of itself wasn't a surprise, but it made him very difficult to contact as a sponsor. So I did the next, what I had done before, and I went to his sponsor. His sponsor was a guy with considerably less sobriety, 4 or 5, 6 years, 6 years, I believe, in California, and I had a very nice relationship with him for quite a while. And then he became unavailable. Well, he lost his sobriety and became unavailable. Those are interrelated there. And so I needed to switch again, and I moved on to a sponsor in Seattle who was great. I've known him for a long time. I really like his program. I quote him actually frequently. But even on his tape, he says, leave a message, I may not get back to you for up to 2 weeks. And that was quite accurate. And for me, having a sponsor that I could actually talk to on a reasonably frequent basis was really important. So I now use as a sponsor a guy who lives in Ireland. The 8-hour time difference is a nuisance, but the availability is there, and the only times I don't talk to him basically are when I don't call him. And Art has been a wonderful gift to my sobriety. So it's what's in my head that's killing me. It's the lust that's killing me. And sitting in that meeting, August 2nd, 1988, in Nashville, Tennessee, I realized I had been around the fringes of AA. I'm not an alcoholic yet, but I had been around the fringes of AA for professional reasons for many years. And as soon as I was sitting in that meeting and, first of all, knew how desperate I was, I really was desperate. It wasn't until years later that I began to get a better read on how desperate I was, but it didn't really matter. What did matter was that I knew I was desperate. I knew that I was willing to go to any lengths to get sober, and I accepted that I was a sex addict, a sexaholic. And I knew that that I had to go to 90 meetings in 90 days because that's what worked. That's what worked in the other fellowships, would be the same in this one. And I knew that I just had to suspend my judgment. I have many character defects, one of which is being very judging and negative. Those tend to go together. And I just had to let go of it. I especially had to let go of the whole God thing. And I took great comfort that God didn't appear in the 12 steps until step 3. Turned out later that was a deception, which I'll talk about. But we don't tell people when they're newcomers that they're going to get through step 12 and then they'll start over again on step 1, because that would probably bum them out. And We don't tell people early on that they're going to have to work the 12 traditions as well as the 12 steps, because that would probably bum them out. And we don't tell people they ever have to stay sober more than 24 hours, because that bums us all out. And so there are a lot of deceptions in this program, or paradoxes, or just sort of, just take the action and let the feelings follow later. It's turned out to be a very good guide. And I also realized this first night, and I didn't appreciate till later how much that helped me, that I was getting drunk on this lust, that I was getting as tipsy and crazy as any alcoholic I had ever heard describe their life and their stories, and that I was a chronic drinker. Some people binge, and some people are chronic, and I realized that first night that I was the kind of drunk who, and I like the language of AA, drunk, who just never let the glass run dry. And I knew alcoholics who had done that, so I had a context for that. Only mine was not alcohol. It was lust fantasies, it was body parts, it was scenarios. I was telling someone the other day I had been sober 3 or 4 days and was just driving in downtown Nashville, or out near one of the universities actually, and came up behind a car, and there was a woman in the car in front of me. I guess she was alone. I'll say more about that in a minute. And I found myself really aroused by her hair, which had not been traditionally one of the things that I thought I was particularly sensitive to, but I was that day. And it was such a gift, because I suddenly realized that I was just going around in a state of continuous scanning for sexual arousal. And it might have been hair, it might have been exhaust pipes. Someone once said they got triggered by soda pop can tops in their disease, and I've had trouble with those ever since. Not funny for you, maybe. And that, all motels, all alleys, all country roads. I mean, it was just endless. And that turned out to be such a gift for me, because that's when I realized, first of all, how constant and how pervasive this lust was in me. And secondly, that this was an awareness that I was finally trying to give it up, because I had never tried to stop it. I had tried to stop once when I was 12 years old, or 13, right in, I think 12, in a health class. And we had a question box, and I put in a question, how much masturbation is too much? And the health teacher's intentions were fine, and he said, well, if it hurts you, it's too much. And, of course, I didn't know what he meant by hurt. I'm not sure he did. But I had been terribly damaged by masturbation and lust, even by age 12. And I really feel, in my case, that I can track my sexual addiction pretty steadily from age 4.5 on. And I'm in my professional life, I'm often around kids and watching them and talking to them and helping set up curricula for them and things like that. And I'll look at a little 8 or 9-year-old and just think, you could be 4 years into the same craziness I have. And it's just really, sad. And I said this to a psychiatrist just about a year ago right now, as a matter of fact. He was conducting a workshop, and I said basically, not all of what I just said, but the basic outline of it. And he just didn't believe the word I was saying. And I said, why don't you start asking your clients when this starts? Because I think that's a lot of it. People don't think it's possible for little kids to be as distorted. But I remember my sponsor, Jess, saying, David, it's pretty rare that someone can get regular access to alcohol or drugs at age 8, 9, or 10. It happens, but it's pretty rare. Whereas we can get regular access to our drug beginning at 4 or 5. No trouble, piece of cake. And he also said, you take an alcoholic, David, and you have them stop drinking and work the steps, and after about a year, they're a pretty decent person. And you take one of us, and we stop acting out sexually and work the steps, and he said maybe 5 or 6 years we become decent people. And he said that after I'd been through 5 or 6, And I was willing to admit that he was right, because my worst rage and anger stuff all came several years into sobriety. And some of the craziest thinking patterns, not so much the behaviors, came later in sobriety. And I think that he probably was passing on his experience, strength, and hope. The deception, it says in the foreword to the 12 and 12, AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in nature, which if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. And that has been my experience, that these are a group of principles, spiritual in nature, and if I practice them as a way of life, they do allow me to become helpfully and usefully whole, and they do expel the obsession. I was telling someone yesterday, the thoughts never have gone away. I was saying a little while ago, I didn't know whether that woman in front of me in Nashville was alone in the car or not, because I have found, and it happens, and as recently as this week, I'm sure it's happened many times, that if a couple, a man and a woman, are walking down the street, if I do choose to look at them, I can tell you probably a fair number of things about the woman. I probably can't tell you anything about the guy other than that he was there. And I'm always grateful when that happens, because it reminds me, first of all, the disease is alive and well, thank you very much. And secondly, that it's a disease of perception, that I'm not processing the world, I am processing some highly filtered version of the world, which is being filtered to allow me to be, to arouse me, to give some sexual stimulus. And it is so deep-seated and so habitual that I do it without any conscious or deliberate effort. And then I'll tell myself, oh, that's the way the world is. A lot of you have heard me say about 10 years ago now, I conducted an experiment for the same reason, actually, walking to meetings from parking my car. And I'm a nice guy, and I would smile at people, especially at women, and they would smile back, and then I'd have to handle that, have to figure out, what to do about what I'd just taken in. Well, just as an experiment for several months, I just kept track that whether women who I was walking past were looking at me at all. And the results of the little experiment really upset me. Because in that time period, there were probably hundreds of women, I guess. I didn't keep count specifically, because I was just looking. After a little while, it became clear what I was checking out. And that is, in that time, not one ever looked at me. They were always looking somewhere else. And so if a woman was looking at me and responding to me, it was solely because I was looking at her, which made a lot of sense given my history. And it really removed any kind of struggle on that, well, how do I deal with the real world and women looking at me, or men, whoever, whatever I'm into. And the answer is, it's all in me in the first place, and it's never been anywhere else. And I tell people that's actually good news, because if it really is inside me, and I have these spiritual principles that can expel the obsession, then this stuff is really going to work. And that's been my experience. It really has worked and continues to work, which is a good thing, because I have a disease that's chronic, progressive, and fatal. It's gone on a long time, roughly 60 years now. It's certainly gotten worse, and the number of relationships that I've killed off, the number of suicides that I have known of people in the program, I just have no doubt that it is fatal. Not only physically fatal, but spiritually, emotionally, and mentally fatal too. Because of the 90, and I knew about the 90 and 90, I knew about working the steps. I did start working the steps right away in August. My sponsor helped me with that. Our primary literature, I'm not going to read from all these, but I identified as a drunk, and I still do. The primary literature is the AA Big Book and the 12 and 12, and those are still the two books, and as Bill sees it, which is Bill Wilson's writings, and then most of them are in these two books, and then there's also AA Comes of Age and some letters. These AA materials are just sort of the foundation of my sobriety and recovery, and they're the books I will most often read. I try to read for many years I read on a daily basis. I would read these 5 books every day, and now I read them probably most days, or at least every other day. I read something, and the same rule is I'm not allowed to read more than 2 pages a day, and I work my way through to the end of the book and start over. So I'm always at different places. In Sexaholics Anonymous, the white book, I'm on page 30, and Recovery Continues, I'm near the end. Recovery Continues takes the least time, Fiction Woman Response. And as Bill sees it, I kind of liked what I read this morning. Provided you hold nothing back in taking the 5th step, your sense of relief will mount from minute to minute. The dammed up emotions of the years break out of their confinement and miraculously vanish as soon as they're exposed. As the pain subsides, a healing tranquility takes its place. When humility and serenity are so combined, something else of great moment is apt to occur. And that's been my experience. The 5th step, whether it's the first big 5th step or whether it's doing 5th steps from time to time, that it has always been something that I really needed to get out and be honest about my behavior. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. And the trade-off is that serenity and humility that comes with it. And the only way to find it is to do it. And I'm sure there are other ways that might work to do it. I just haven't found anything that's as efficient as working the steps. And I do like efficiency. I was in the program quite a few years when I realized this is actually a program for lazy people. It even says it in the big book. Many of us have sought an easier, softer way, but we couldn't find it. And these 12 steps really are the easier, softer way for addicts. There are plenty of people who act out with drugs or alcohol or sex or gambling or whatever, and who can stop. More power to them. I wouldn't wish this stuff on anybody. But for people who can't stop, there's nothing that's going to work as well and as long over such a long period of time, in my experience, as the 12 steps. I did my first step in the first 30 days. It was after 2 or 3 weeks, 3 weeks probably. It took 2 meetings. I would look around the table. It was a table about this big, slightly smaller than the 4 of these. It was sort of a boardroom kind of thing I think we were in a church. And I remember looking around the room and just being petrified to tell these group of people, all but a couple of whom were really strangers to me, exactly what I had done, admitting my powerlessness and my unmanageability. And I just did it, and then it wasn't done after 1 meeting, so I had to come back and do the rest of it. And a couple of the people who were there for that first step were still around in the program. Most are long gone. And I'm so glad it took 2 sessions because I had that time in between to experience what was changing in me as I did it. And that experience of realizing how constantly I was lusting that I had had when I pulled up behind that car after 2 or 3 days was ebbing steadily. By the time I did my first step, I had already made my 2:30 a.m. call. My wife and I were separated in the house, and I was sleeping upstairs. She was down. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning or so, and I was aroused. It was mid-August, so it was warm weather. I remember, I think I just had a sheet on. And I knew I was going to masturbate. I was really desperate. And I called Harvey, as it turned out. And he answered the phone. And told him what was going on, and he told me what to do, which was to write a gratitude list for all the negative things in my life, and to read the AA Big Book. He said, after you've written the gratitude list, the AA Big Book would put anybody to sleep. And I did those two things, and they worked like a charm. And I went back to sleep. And that showed me some things that I've never forgotten and have been so important. First of all, this really is a we program. I could not have gotten through it without calling somebody and without what he was willing to pass along from his sponsor. And secondly, and my willingness to make that call made all the difference in the world. Secondly, that the steps and traditions really work if we do them, and they don't work if we don't. And when I actually followed his suggestions and was grateful for all the things that I wasn't comfortable with God at that point, but all the things I called God Master, like in a teacher, whatever Master was trying to teach me was fine, and I just needed to learn it. And the third thing was to be pushed back into the Big Book anytime I needed it. And that's one of the things about 12-step recovery and this program that I think people don't always appreciate is how important it is to have something that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year long, year after year. Because that's what it takes for me to be okay. And that's what it takes for me to get what I need to work this program and then to pass it on to other people. So when I did my first step, I had already had that experience, and then I got the palpable experience of just the image. A lot of people have heard this many times. The image I have is I piled all my stuff, all the crap, all the misbehavior and the betrayals and the lies, and on a giant garbage barge. And in the process of doing my first step, I cut the rope. And everything I put on that barge is still there, and for several weeks and even a year after, I had to go back periodically and throw something else on the barge that I'd forgotten about. And it's all just as stinky. I just had a situation about a month ago now where somebody contacted me to let me know that people were still dredging through the barge. And, I feel sad they have to do it. At the same time, everything that I did, all the lies, all the betrayals, all the sexual acting out, I really did. I did all those things. And if someone wants to go look through the pile, it's not only all there, in fact, some of it's stinky because it's been there a long time. And it's just, if I stay sober today, I'm still disconnected from that barge, and I'm one day further away from that pile. And I have not had to add to that pile other than things I've just remembered in many, many years. And for that, I can never be sufficiently grateful. I guess I should say something about that phrase. When I got sober in Nashville, Tennessee, in 1988, we had 6 meetings a week. On Sunday night, we didn't have an SA meeting. And I've always been grateful. The guy who knew me that first meeting I went on to start SAA in Nashville, and they had a number of meetings by then. And I would go to the SAA meeting on Sunday night. And that was, I'm really glad I had to do that. I'm glad it was there, first of all. And secondly, one of the funniest things that's ever, many funny things have happened, but this is one of the funniest. I had, just before I had gone to the meeting one Sunday night, I had leaned against the sink to look in the mirror or something. I don't know what I was doing. And I pushed against my penis, and I had been a little aroused by it, and it just really scared me. So I went to the meeting, and I shared that. And this old AA guy who had a very gravelly voice, kind of like mine is sounding today, actually, he heard me say that, and he said, "Oh, you'll get over it." And I've been laughing about it ever since. And I have to say that I don't think it's been a problem ever since either. I mean, 21 some years ago. And that is the case. If we just let it go, we will get over it, no matter what it is. And I just hear his voice, oh, you'll get over it, in my head. I'm so glad to have had that tie to the other fellowship, and I've been to SLAA meetings off and on over the years too. SA is clearly the right place for me, and at the same time, I'm so grateful that we have a wide range of fellowships. What I was really grateful for, I didn't know it at the time though, was that those 6 meetings a week that we had were the highest density of meetings in the world. Because LA had a few more meetings, but they also had 20 million people, and we had 1 million. And I had just happened to choose, or God had put me where I needed to get sober in a place that truly had remarkable SA. And that was because my sponsor, then or soon-to-be sponsor, Harvey, and a woman named Jean P. had started SA, both alcoholics, both having profound sexual issues, and Harvey came up against his 6th step is really what happened. His sponsor wanted him to work his 6th step, and Harvey realized he wasn't willing to let go of his lust and his sexual acting out. And that really scared him, because he knew that if he did act out sexually, he would go back to drinking, and he also knew that if he took a drink, he would act out sexually. And he was so petrified. And he happened on Jean, and they had the pamphlet. I don't know if we probably don't know have it here. The little basic essay pamphlet, and that was it. That was all the literature they had. It turned out later that some of what became the White Book had been written, but initially they just had the pamphlet, and they started having meetings. The tragic thing, really. The third person who was involved was also named Roy Kay. He was in Nashville, and he actually was the one who had the pamphlet. He had written to Simi Valley, and they had sent it back to him. Little Roy, he was called because he wasn't the founder, went on to. My wife has wanted for many years to have a bumper sticker made that says "Shoot yourself first." Because she's so tired of these guys killing their wives and big children and then killing themselves. And why not just do yours first, is her motto. And it turns out little Roy had not really surrendered lust and did in fact kill. It was a girlfriend and is still in Tennessee State Prison serving a life without parole sentence. So he was out of SA. But Harvey and Jean kept it going. And Jean used to say, anytime she talked about her sobriety, how long she'd been sober, and talked about the program, she would always end it with, "For which I can never be sufficiently grateful." And it's not only an accurate phrase, there are phrases like that buried in our sayings and our literature, in our meeting formats that have come from people in the past. And my sponsor used to say, David, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And what that means by definition is because we're standing on their shoulders, we will always see further than they can see, than they could see. And at the same time, if they weren't there, we wouldn't have seen it all. And there are all sorts of things like that lust phrase that Jess responded to that are implicit in who we are. And I know, there are people that I sponsor and people that they sponsor that will see and do things far beyond anything I've been able to do. And yet they're just doing it because they're standing on, someone else's shoulders and my shoulders, and I'm standing on other people's shoulders, and that's what makes this stuff work for us. The working the steps, doing the first step, realizing that I was doing it for me, not to entertain the people who were there, or because they would necessarily stay sober themselves. As I said, as far as I know, most did not. It just got me through all sorts of, I want to keep a secret. And I realized I hadn't been in SA very long before I realized that I can't have secrets. I tried the experiment, I tell people this, of telling everybody everything. And that was really, 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 really dumb. And I encourage you not to do it. I also tried for quite a while telling people, if I'm interested in you, you have some kind of addiction. That's true, but it's also really, 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 really dumb. And I really trashed some very nice friendships doing that. I look back now on all the things I did when I first got sober, and they are such classic newcomer, new convert kind of stuff. And I thought, I won't do that because I'm telling everybody everything, which was true. My sponsor knew. But what I didn't realize is, and I have a lot of this attitude myself, some people sometimes think I'm a nice guy, and they're so wrong. They were quite happy to let me crash into the stone wall, the concrete walls, all on my own. And I did it over and over again. And it took me a long time to realize that this telling people things, or breaking my anonymity, which is related to that, was my character defect of exhibitionism. And I had been an exhibitionist since I was 4.5 years old. Probably a little younger, actually, but I can do concrete memories from 4.5. And my exhibitionism did not go away quickly or willingly. It changed forms for a while. But I never forget Harvey saying to me, David, before we got sober, all we did was think and talk and wonder about sex. And he said, now that we're sober, all we do is think and talk and wonder about sex. But the purpose is entirely different. And that my exhibitionism and the sexual connection with that, when I came in the program, I was 42. So it had 38 years of momentum. And all of that breaking my anonymity at my initiative, and I'll say more about that in a second, and telling secrets and telling people, my sense about whether they had compulsive issues or not. All of that was just my exhibitionism. Look at me, look at me, look at me. Aren't I special? And if I can't be the very best, then I'll be the very worst. And it's just ego. And letting go of ego. I told someone yesterday, another deception, I guess. I said, the things we have to actually change in this program are very, very simple, which is true. It's a true statement. AA says it, if you want to be sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, you only do two things. You stop drinking and you change everything in your life. And that's pretty much the case with us. We stop acting out sexually, and then the way I usually put it is, we surrender our right to choose how we use our time. And basically surrender our egos to a higher power. And my sponsor, Harvey, said to me, David, the only thing you have to know about your higher power is it's not you. And that is also turns out to be a quote from the AA Big Book, and it turns out to be accurate. God has spoken out to me and reached out to me through thousands of other people, situations, and it's all my higher power as long as I remember it's not me. And I'm grateful for that, because it was feeling alone and feeling that I had to make sense of this world and cope and survive and take care of myself and all those things on my own. That's what kept this insanity going for so many years. I mentioned some of the acting out. I think the things that really stand out looking back, as I mentioned, that taking my clothes off in public beginning as a kid, sexual activity with other boys, and I had been, when I was in my 30s, long before I got sober, I came to terms with my attraction to men, and it kind of had its roots back in that sexual acting out with the boys, other boys, and yet it was just a part of who I was, and I just realized that he was not going to be the active person in my life. And he'd come around the next go around, I guess, and that was helpful to me. I remember despairing when I was 20 that I did not know how to relate to a female, and that was of any age, from very, very young to very, very old, without sexualizing it. And I was so humiliated, because because I didn't really want to act on it. I just couldn't relate without those thoughts coming into my mind. And I didn't know what to do about it. As I said, when I was 12, I had asked about stopping masturbating, and the guy said, just don't hurt yourself. 20 years later, I asked a therapist, well, I'm having all these affairs over and over again, what do I do? And or 30 years, I guess, 30 years later. And he said, well, just don't let them bother you. Don't let it bother you so much. So between don't worry about masturbation unless you're hurting yourself, and don't let the affairs bother you so much, I was sort of selectively, of course, looking for reasons to continue in the acting out. And I'm sure there were other messages. I had a colleague who just begged me to stop going out for lunches alone with women. He really begged me. And he was a very large football player, very intellectually a Greek scholar, very well-grounded, very compassionate guy. And I know he really was just trying to help me not crash into one of those concrete walls. He didn't know about sexual addiction, of course, but he did know what was healthy behavior, and basically he was saying, if you go out for lunch with a woman, you're dating her, David, and that's not a message you want to give when you're married, and a minister and all those other things. So I ignored him. It was the best I could do. I guess that's one thing I want to get off on briefly here is that I realized, looking back on my life and the acting out, all that time acting out and getting sober, that I was always doing the best I could do. And that sometimes the best I could do was really, really awful. I could look my wife straight in the eyes and lie to her, and she would believe me. It's hard to know which was worse, that I was lying to her, looking at her, and being so convincing, or that she would believe me. But both were true, and that was awful. It was awful when I tried to seduce a 16-year-old who was seriously mentally ill, had very bad anorexia nervosa, and I did stop. That's about the only good thing I can say for myself. I think I realized how ill she really was, and yet that was the hardest part of my fourth step and fifth step, is to talk about that. Because the shame, genuinely deserved, it was a terrible thing to do, was very deep. The sexual acting out with women and really betraying their trust, which I got pretty good at manipulating. I remember consciously finding clothes to wear that were. I'm still a closed dork, but when my disease progressed, I realized that I could wear certain clothes that would trigger more of a reaction in women. I thought this was such a discovery, women did it all the time, I realized later. But a woman in our program in Nashville one time after a meeting, or during a meeting, I don't remember which, talked about how she had her using clothes. And I was so grateful to her because I realized I had my own set. And actually, looking back, I realized that the first night I got sober, that Tuesday night, I stopped back by my office and threw out all my pornography. I missed a couple pieces, it turned out, but everything I'd found I threw out. And then I went home and threw out my Speedo bathing suit. So I guess I knew about using clothes, even if I wasn't all that honest about it. And that's what knowing that I had always done the best I could do really meant in practice, is that whether it was really, really awful or illegal, I remember once thinking the only question I didn't answer was getting arrested for sexual acting out. But it wasn't because I couldn't have been. Having sex in the park with a woman slightly over a hillside, thinking we couldn't be seen, when it was a wide open park. I could have easily been arrested. It turns out we were seen together by one of my wife's friends, and that's what actually led to quitting that job and moving. But anyway, there were all sorts of things where if I go back and I'm honest about them, and how awful they were, that's what opens the door to freedom, not if I try to. My sponsor said, David, you're always putting rosy-colored glasses on your story. And he would talk about the smells and the filth and the shame and the suicidal ideation everything he said was true of me. I did work through the steps. I did the amends. I've worked through the steps. My sponsors have told me consistently that I should always know what step I'm working on, and so I do. I'm most often working on step 11, but periodically, one time Jess said, do a fourth step, and I said, what should I do it on? And he said, ask your wife, and my blood ran cold. So I did ask my wife, and what she had me do a fourth step on was just so totally appropriate and just totally unexpected. She said, do a fourth step and a fifth step on making people feel more important than they actually are. And that is right at the root of my disease. You know, I learned, I was told as a 5-year-old that I was acting like an adult. And of course I wasn't an adult, I was a 5-year-old. And what I was doing is I had learned how to read people and to make them feel more important than they actually were. And what I was doing, of course, was hiding my own ego underneath this outside exterior of being concerned about them. And it doesn't mean I didn't. One of the hardest things in sobriety was realizing that I had done a lot of good while I was drunk. I really rejected that for years. And that, again, was just ego. God used me all along. And it's just my ego that said it was either all good or all bad. Another thing that was so hard in sobriety, this took many years, was accepting how sick other people could be. Because part of my self-centered disease is that if someone's going to be sick in this room, I have to be the sickest. In fact, it'd be best if I were the only one. And whether it's in my own family or whether it's people I work with or friends, there's a lot of people, to some extent, we're all emotionally ill as well as frequently wrong, is what the 12 and 12 says, and that's exactly my experience. And one of the hardest things, those were both very hard. One of the other really hard things, and my sponsor really had to nail me on this one, was accepting that the guy who had done all those things, some of which I've mentioned here today, the guy who had had all those thoughts and had this disease that gets everything backwards and upside down and distorts things sexually, that guy really is gone. He's really dead. I had a whole series of death dreams. That's how it came up. And that if I don't reconnect to that barge, that guy is just gone. He is not the guy sitting here in this room today. Sure, I don't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. I can talk about all those things. I don't have to act on those things today, and I don't even want to act on those things today. And sometimes I can get distracted by lust, of course. And what my sponsor taught me is that's just God reminding you you're a sexaholic, David. You're only at risk if you forget it. There's more I could share. I think I'll just close with a couple of things. These 3 AA materials, our White Book on Recovery continues, our member stories, and there was a 1989 version and then this 2007. And then our step books and the tradition book. We just finished editing Tradition 1 and we're halfway through Tradition 2. And he sent the first draft of Tradition 7 a couple of days ago. So we're well on our way to getting our Traditions book out too. And at some point we'll collapse them all into one book. But we really do have a program that continues to grow that has helped thousands and thousands of women and men, and continues to work if I work it. A few days ago, she made one and I made one. Hers is better than mine. And this little 20-sided figures that, in my case, have little phrases on them. I have a disease that tells me I don't have a disease. Ego is always beneath the inability to surrender. Selfishness is the root of our problems. Faced fear vanishes. Recovery is the easier, softer way. God's in charge of timing. Just do the opposite. Theme song of my life. Keep putting things back where you found them. If you spot it, you got it. If I'm disturbed, there's something with me. It's really fun, and so you can just roll it. And Dr. Paul says, just if you have a problem, pick a number, 1 through 12, and that's what to do. And this, you can roll this one doesn't roll very well. Anyway, it's fun to have these things around just to remind us what it was like, what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. And as I said, for all that's happened to me today, I can never be sufficiently grateful. Thanks.
It was time for our seventh tradition. We pay for